Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Daily AI Show interview series. And today we have none other than Amanda Bickerstaff. Welcome, Amanda. How are you?
I am good. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, we appreciate you being here as well. And I've been looking forward to this, doing this interview. I know I reached out to you several months ago, and I was like, "We're going to do an interview, part of our thing." And then it was like 4 months later. I'm like, "Okay, no, seriously, we're going to do it this time." And you were gracious enough to say that you were still interested or available. So we appreciate it. Our goal with this interview series is just to talk to all sorts of interesting people, through AI. What people are doing. You obviously being CEO of a company called AI for Education, it's kind of well suited for our audience. And so, yeah, I have some questions, prepared, but we can take this any way we want. Probably go about 30 minutes, and give you an opportunity at the end there to make sure that people know all the good places to reach out to you for business or to follow you on socials and things like that. So if you're ready, I'd love to start with kind of something I'm interested in, because when I was looking through your history, one of the things it said was that you went to Emory University. Well, I grew up in Georgia. I actually was a firefighter. I don't know if we crossed paths at the same years, but I was a firefighter at Station 1 on Clifton Road. So I'm very familiar with the Emory University and Eggleston and the CDC. One of the first things they told me at the station that day was, I was like, "Oh, are we first due for things that go on the CDC?" And I had a captain that just sort of blank faced me and was like, "No." And I was like, "What do you mean? No, we're right next door." And he said, "We're already part of the problem if something bad happens at the CDC." And I thought, we have some large universities around here. I don't know who was thinking about this when they put the CDC right where they did.
Right here. Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to ask you about that. No, go ahead. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, no, I'm from Georgia as well. So any Georgia football fans out there, I am a big Georgia football fan. Emory does not have a football team. Do you have it? Yeah. So this is my grandmother's house. She's 91 years old in New Jersey. My parents are visiting from a small town in Georgia. And so I'm here with them. And so my parents are fanatics with football. And I grew up, absolutely tailgating at like 4 and the whole get up Georgia Bulldogs. And then I went to Emory, which has Emory does not have a football team, but it does have a really good science program. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to help people. And when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease in college, that kind of went out the window. So I was like, what can I do to help people? And that's how I became a teacher. And that's been what's brought me to AI for Education, and a long and winding path.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about is like, so you go from, I'm sure there's more to this, is why I want to ask you. You're a student at Emory, and then it seems to be, at least from what I can tell, pretty short order, you're a brand new teacher in the Bronx, in the shadow of Yankee Stadium. How does that happen? Is it just, I want to be a teacher and that's where their job, or surely not? So how did you end up going to the Bronx as a Georgia kid?
Yeah, it's pretty funny because I grew up in a really small town, and my grandmother was from New Jersey, and so there was always a joke that I had two grandmothers. The Georgia grandmother was going to teach me how to be a homemaker. She failed miserably, as I'm the CEO of a tech company that's been around the world. And then my grandmother in New Jersey was going to teach me how to shop and things. So it was always a joke, and that's very gendered, but it was a while ago. And so I had experience in the Northeast, but I really wanted to be a doctor. That was what I was going to do. And I kind of got to a point where I got to my last 6 months of college and didn't know what was happening next. And actually got really sick the day of my interview for Teach for America. And I remember leaving that room and being like, nope, did not get that. And I didn't. But there was also at that stage, the New York Teaching Fellows, which is now part of TNTP. If you're familiar with the education piece, it's an alternative route certification program that is quite a bit different in the sense of it's not just early graduates. So I was actually the only early graduate, recent graduate in my science cohort. But I went up for an interview in New York City and, in May. And then I was April. And then I moved to New York in June and started, teaching, in Bronx science, which is during the summer. And then I was in one of the highest complexity, low income, lowest rated schools in the country. And that's where I did
Hmm.
my teaching. And it is by far the most formative experience of my entire life, not just in terms of my career. Taught me a ton about, like, talking where today is MLK Day, talk about equity, talk about access, talk
Yep,
about
exactly.
the divide that happens. Like, I saw that in such a, visceral experience where so much of teaching we don't recognize has so little to do with what happens in the school and what so much about what kids bring in with them, and
Of
how do
course.
we support students that come from a system that doesn't support them all the time. So yeah, so that was my first job. And uh, if I ever do a TED talk, it's going to be do it the hardest possible way. So I have had
Yeah.
many weird, not weird, but like difficult jobs and
Yeah.
transitions through life. But it has been, I still look back at that time, and I wouldn't be here today and doing what I'm doing without that time in the Bronx.
Yeah, I would imagine at that age too, you're assuming early 20s if you just got out of college or whatever, that's also a formative time in your own life,
Mm.
and then, uh, you know, Emory, well, Emory probably looks a little bit different. I'd say if you were at UGA, maybe a little bit different. Emory is a little bit more, diverse, more in the city, right? Into Decatur and Atlanta. But certainly again, not the Bronx, So I can imagine, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you about. I want to hit it again. I have a later question, but just talking about this idea of equity, which I know is one of your, I think you call it your three E's. And I have a good friend, Evan Erdberg. He's the CEO of Proximity Learning, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with their company or not. But I've worked with Evan now for several years as a client, and I've just known him for a while. And I love what he's doing as part of his mission with proximity learning. And the hashtag that we always used when we were helping with LinkedIn posts was equity for 1 million students. And so I asked him one time, I said, why 1 million? And he said, well, I have a belief that at the point at which we can reach 1 million students, it will take on a life of its own, and it will have like a reverberating effect. And I thought that was such a great way to look at it. It's something they actively track, like it's an actual KPI for them to like
Mm.
how far are we, where are we going, and it's nothing they're going to hit next week, but it's that stretch goal for them. So just wondering from you, you talked about that. Obviously, you saw the haves and have-nots. You saw what it's like. Evan would tell a story about going in, and they're like, oh, here are our math books, and he'd say, okay, and they're like, no, that's the math books for everybody. That's for all classes. They come in and grab the math book and they put the math book back. There's no taking it home. There's no nothing like that. So I'm just throw it back to you. Like, what kind of experiences did you have in those early days before you went on to work in like teacher curriculum type companies? That sort of, I don't know, formulated how now you're doing stuff at AI for education.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think that the complexity of what happens outside of the school, I think the common way we think about equity in schools and the divide is so much about, like you talked about, like equipment, money, et cetera. And so little of it is
Mm-hmm.
talked about the fact that like your students might be in a food desert. Or if
Right.
they don't have, if something goes wrong and they get a common cold, but it's a bad one, they don't go to urgent care. They have to go to the hospital because of lack of health care. And then they're there for
Mm-hmm.
6 to 8 hours. And we have things like group homes. We have, so many big questions, no place to study, no devices, et cetera.
Yeah.
That is as much about readiness to learn. Like the readiness to learn component is as important as the quality of the teacher and the quality of the instruction, the quality of the materials. And I think that that's what we miss. We often see education as a panacea, and it really can be transformative, and it can, start to get towards that gap and lower it. But the gap persists because of what happens as much outside the classroom as inside the classroom. And I think that's what we
Sure.
often miss. We also put a lot of pressure on our educators, and we want to have a high standard, but there is so much more we could be doing for students. And in this moment of time, you talking about AI, GPT-4 is by far still the best on the market, and it is prohibitively
Mm-hmm.
expensive for not just students, but for teachers and for schools. The fact that you can pay $25 a person per month for a piece of
Right.
software that it can also, is often hallucinating and has major issues around ethics and safety and reliability, but it's only going to be really available to those that can afford that. I mean, it's really kind of
Sure.
a crazy piece, and that's just consistent, like where this access piece is really important. And I think about that a lot And what we do, we talked about three E's, we are focused on the responsible adoption of AI in the education ecosystem. And we look at that through like looking at how we can think about ethical adoption. We can
Hmm.
look at effective adoption, like is it actually driving teacher productivity and or instructional gains, so to speak. And then the last thing is
Hmm.
on equitable. Like, are we creating spaces in which we are allowing, everyone to have the same chance? And it's really interesting. So we actually, all of our kind of resources are targeted not at ChatGPT 4, but at 3.5, even though it is
Sure.
less than, so to speak, because it's
Hmm.
fully available. And if we can teach people to get like 90% of what they need as an educator through a free tool, we have such
Hmm.
a better chance um, to be able to be in a position where we can start to see like it not just being in private schools or schools that have connections to Silicon Valley or to tech
Sure.
budgets or to
Yeah.
people that like the early adopters. And so that's the way we think about it. And it completely goes back to that moment in time. And pretty much all of my career, I worked in organizations that had no equity lens at all. And then by the time I
Yeah.
left, it always had some, right? Because it's just I just can't do it. I just can't find the will, so to speak, to work this hard unless it is hopefully try like actually positively impacting the education ecosystem that goes beyond that first step. It needs to go to the deeper
Sure.
level, or I just can't keep the interest.
Yeah. No, it makes sense to me. I mean, I think, it goes back to maybe you saying you always wanted to be a doctor, and it's not a shock to me that you were a teacher after that. There's so many crossovers and parallels, and that deep desire to not just help, the wealthy, but everybody, and that obviously is something that you want to do. So, like, you obviously, after teacher, it looks like you went and you worked for several different companies. You obviously got a ton of experience with creating curriculums and working and continuing. You didn't leave education, you continue to leave education. Now it's like 11, 12 months ago. ChatGPT has probably been out for, at this point, 3 months, let's say. And at least from the date that it shows, I'm sure you were thinking about it beforehand. You decided to bring it out and start your own company, AI for education. And while I want to dig in much deeper into AI education before we get there, I'm just curious, like, what was that impetus? What was that thing where you're like, you know what? No, I could keep going and working for other people, which is highly respectable, and there's a lot of good to be done within the corporate world stuff. Or no, maybe I have a different way of looking at this, and I think the only solution is if I take this on myself. Like, what was that decision like for you? 2, 3, 4 months barely after ChatGPT hits the modern stage.
Yeah, well, so my last job, I was actually the CEO of an education technology company in Melbourne, Australia. I am
Yeah, I
not
saw that.
Australian, everybody. And it was confusing. It was confusing when I was a CEO there, and then now that I talk about it, it's still confusing. It's a very,
Sure.
you don't think it happens very often. I think if anything, it kind of is the other way around. But I went to Melbourne in 2019, and I ended up being a first time CEO in a new country where I knew no acronyms at all. And we love
Hmm.
acronyms in education. Uh,
Yeah.
and I managed to be in the most locked down place in the world. So I was running a bootstrapped organization in a new country about 3 months after I moved officially. And yeah,
Mm.
that was my first, year was literally trying to keep the company afloat.
Yeah.
We launched research. I kind of think that very. I have this mindset. I think of like lean into the places in which you have skills and times of disruption. So I have a background in research. So we did a bunch of research that actually had international acclaim. We actually had the largest study of its kind on the impact of COVID in the first month of lockdown around the world than any other organization. And so we did a lot of that work and worked really hard, and we ended up building a well-being tool off the back of that because that was the major concern for most schools outside of very low-income schools, where the low-income schools were worried about digital divide, and then everyone else was worried about social emotional learning. And so, it was really interesting, but like, man, like it was really hard. I was, not only geographically isolated, but isolated in time and
Yeah.
place. We don't even talk about time zones. Um, and
Mm.
also just, I had been working for a really long time for other people doing things that mattered, but maybe not in the right organization. And
Right.
I would just put myself like in the grinder because it was like we're, building a company and culture and we're helping people. But,
Sure.
what ends up happening is you end up the casualty. And so I got super duper burnt out. I was in a position where it just wasn't tenable for anymore. And so I definitely didn't think, hey, I'll get a CEO position before I'm 40 and then I'm going to quit
Right.
it. Like that was
Yeah.
never, I was like, I
Right.
don't think that's what you do. That's definitely not what I thought I was going to do. And so,
Sure.
but it was the right move. And so I also knew that I probably wanted to do something on my own next time. So I went on a burnout trip for 6 months because I was afraid if I like moved back to New York, considering how expensive it was, I would just
Yeah.
start working. And I was just not in a
Out of
position as a,
necessity. Yeah.
yeah. But as a leader, like you have to be able to deal with complex situations and people's experience. And I just couldn't even deal with myself. So I
Yeah.
definitely wasn't doing that. So I traveled a lot and I actually was traveling when ChatGPT came out. So even though we started AI for Education, I started it in April. I had never used ChatGPT until March, which is quite funny because as
Wow.
an early adopter, I'm not even an early adopter compared to some people, I'm sure, like you
Sure.
guys,
Yeah.
because I was still like just messing about Japan, and
Yeah.
I got back and I think at that stage you're like, what are you good at? Running other people's companies. Like, I think that was feedback I had gotten. So I kind of went through that process. And then I used ChatGPT the first time. And this is a very true story. And instead of doing something for myself, I always think this is like a Rorschach test. What is the first way you use generative AI? Is I asked it to build me a rubric. And the reason I did
Mm.
that is because I hate writing rubrics. And one of
Yeah.
my jobs, I hate it. In one of my jobs, I had 600 rubrics that I reviewed or wrote in 20 months.
Oh,
And I am
oh,
still a broken human. I'm still broken from this
yeah.
moment.
That's a lot.
And
That's
you
a
never
lot.
get them right. You never get them right. The formatting is weird. Like, if you know what you accidentally forget to change any to more or whatever, all those little things. And so a really crappy prompt, and I was like, create a rubric for. And then in 10 seconds, when it created a rubric for me in 3.5 and it formatted in a table, I was like, oh my gosh, guys,
Yeah.
wait, 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 wait,
Like
wait.
magic. Yeah.
This is the transformational technology we've been talking about for years in education technology. The possibility of
Hmm.
personalization at scale, with differentiation, productivity gains. And then I realized at the exact same moment, it's like two light bulbs that were competing was, oh no, this is not like Better Google. This is not
Right.
intuitive. This is completely different. How are we possibly going to support educators and the education ecosystem to be able to understand this technology? So it was right before ASUGSV, which is the big edtech conference out in San
Mhm.
Diego. And I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. So I was like, I'm going to build a website in a weekend. And as a non website designer, I
Yeah. Yeah.
use Squarespace, which I'm still mad
Yep.
about because now we're popular and we have a crappy, no offense to Squarespace. And if you
Right.
love
Right.
Squarespace, DM me and tell me how to figure it out. But anyway,
Yeah,
we have
it's plug and
Squarespace.
play. I get it. Yeah. Yeah. It's good
And
for a website on the weekend, but not great if you're trying to build a huge, lasting business. Yeah. Yeah.
not great when you have like the most like the highest search term for prompt library now out of nothing,
Sure.
not even
Yeah.
educator prompt library, but built a prompt library in a weekend with some common issues including rubrics, put into the world. This is a true story. There's a Matt Miller who runs a company called Oco Labs. We met at the conference and we did a walk together, and I told him about what I was doing, just launched this thing. And then I saw him again in October and he said, I thought you were nuts. Who is this woman who is just like, I built this website on a
Yep.
weekend with a prompt library and it's AI for education. And so what's happened is we had our first school in under a month and a half. We've now
Wow.
done our intro to generative AI training in 6 countries. We're on the major policy and nonprofit boards, including teachai.org and EdSafe AI Alliance. And we get to, our resources are literally cited in like the North Carolina guidance that just came out, which is the fourth state to have guidance on AI. We're cited throughout the document. So it's been a pretty wild ride. And even though I didn't touch it until March, you know, immediately crystallized something that we need to do. And, 7 months later, 8 months later, and we're just in this really great position where literally today I was with a K-8 district in New Jersey working with 150 teachers. We're only about maybe 15% of them have ever used ChatGPT, and teaching
Yep.
them how to use this for their practice, understand the limitations and capabilities, and start to think about how it's going to enhance their practice.
Yeah, that
Well, I,
brings up a really good point. Like you have said you have to understand where people are coming from. And it seems like in this place and time, students and teachers are not necessarily coming from the same place, and teachers aren't necessarily coming from the same place as other teachers. So, how do you lower the cognitive load for adoption in these kind of environments? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's a great question, Beth. And this is the blank page is the hardest thing, right? When you think about cognitive
mhm.
load, a blank
Yep.
page, a blank canvas, how do I get started? And that's why we procrastinate like crazy, or we don't get started. So the idea of this moment in time is that this is not an intuitive technology. I don't know. I mean, like, the only reason it's conversational AI is because it's the easiest way to get in front of people as quickly as possible. It's not the best UX. It's not the
Right.
best for people. It's not the most reliable. It's not the easiest. Definitely not. And so what we have to do is that we have like the most technology people use day to day is like social media and Google. And those are not lift and shift ways of thinking about generative AI. In fact,
No.
some of the biggest mistakes you can make is thinking it's like a Google search. And
Right.
so what we do is that prompt library is key. First of all, we don't even get to prompt engineering until about the half an hour mark of a 90-minute, because we talk about myths and misconceptions, lower
Hmm.
the rhetoric in the room about, idea of replacing teachers, or that AI detection works, or that these
Yeah.
technologies are thinking. The amount of people, because of the conversational AI, that think that AI, generative AI, is thinking would blow
Right.
you away. And
Yeah.
so this is because, again, UX decisions make a big, if you're a UX person out there, like, like the ways in which we create things really change user behavior and also user thinking about what your tool does. And so we do that. We also talk about, ask everybody to take out their phones. Like, very rarely in a presentation, we ask someone to do that. And we talk about 84% of us interact with AI, more classical AI, every single day. And so we
Sure.
situate this in the truth of it, right? That we all experience this, but that we've had this amazing step change, this transformational change. And then what we do is we go into our prompt library, and you talk about cognitive load. It's got over
Mm.
100 prompts for educators, including like non-educators. Like, we had secretaries and nurses today. And what you do is you have in the prompt library, it's as much a pedagogical or andragogical tool as it's a productivity tool. And so it does, it says, okay, rubrics. Here's a
Mhm.
prompt that you can change, where you can actually add a different, grade level or topic. But if you're not sure how to get started, we have an example built for you. All you do is cut and paste it, and you put it into any chatbot. And what you're going to
Mhm.
get is a beautiful rubric formatted in the table, and it's going to be easy to follow. And that just collapses the cognitive load. And I'm telling you,
Sure.
the amount of, like, hands up, eyes big, oh my gosh. And then what we
Yep.
do is I riff on it, like, let's add this and do that and make it less complex. And that just collapses this between establishing it's been here for a long time, getting rid of those misconceptions, and then actually having them just be able to cut and paste a good example to something that matters for them, tends
Yep.
to bring it down. And you no longer have people saying AI is for cheating, AI is for cheating. You start to say,
Mm.
oh my gosh, okay, AI could be for so many things. And
Yeah.
one
AI
of
is
my
my
favorite,
co-pilot.
yeah, co-pilot, we call it, we say thought partner. Like, we
Yeah.
think of it as a
Nice.
thought partner or a brainstorming partner.
Hmm.
But now I'm showing them more and more generative search, which is going to be like where we do have better Google, like Perplexity, that then becomes your research intern, and things in
Yeah.
that nature. And I think that that's where it just gets really rich. But this is a show, not tell time. If you're
Right.
doing a presentation, if you're training your staff, I know you have all kinds of listeners. If you're training yourselves, the best way to do this is to build your AI literacy, but then it's just get in there and try and play.
Yep.
You can have scaffolding like we have, or just like your imagination, run wild. Just try it. It could fail miserably and be super weird, but at the same time, you're going to be shocked at what you can do if you really just get in there and start thinking through the process and just experiment.
We talk about this all the time on the show, so we're definitely in lock and step with that, which is there's no substitution for getting in there, trying and failing, and also being okay with the first results you get back being absolutely horrible. But you got to know that like that's not a time to bail on it, because it didn't give you a great first answer doesn't mean it's incapable. That's where prompting comes in, and one of the things I love about your prompt library, and I mean this by the way, because I have built not an education, but I built a large prompt library, but situated for sales. So it's for sales professionals and all that. One of the first things that happened to me was I have the ability to create large, complex prompts. And of course, that's where my brain went initially. But it was having conversations with my CEO and this guy, Jake Dunlap, and thinking about it. And he's like, you're overreaching the end user. And it's absolutely true, by the way. So we scale back, and now the prompt library is what I would consider to be fairly simplistic prompts, but very similar to yours. They're a gateway to, oh, if it can do that, could it do this? If I could do that, could it do this? What about this? And like you're saying, like tomorrow I have two huge, long workshops with two different levels of sales professionals, the executive and director side of it, but also the end user. But in both cases, it really does just come back to meeting the end user exactly where they are, whether it's the student, the teacher, the sales rep, it doesn't matter. Meeting them exactly where they are. And like you said, a lot of times that's starting with, they haven't even opened it up. They're familiar with it as in the zeitgeist. They know it exists, but it's not necessarily a tool that they've gone after. We just have a few minutes left, Amanda, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about AI for education, all the amazing things you've done. We talked about your prompt library. Before we get there, I do have one question I want to get to. I have a couple on my screen over here. But you had mentioned in one of your blogs or something in the research I was doing that you're really excited, but kind of going back to this equity piece of as we get closer and closer to these language models being available fully offline on phones or computers that can sit inside schools and stuff like that. So one of the shows we had was talking recently about how Apple is developing what they call LLM in a flash. And this idea that it can exist in flash memory without power, and it's just sending it over to RAM when it needs to. So we know these things are coming. I think we always talk about on this show, the fun thing about AI is that you can always see just a bit over the hill. So whether it's multimodal or whatever, we always have this sight of like, oh, I can see this. We're not there today, but I definitely know where this is going. It's the fun part of it. So as you look at that, before we kind of get into like, all the other great stuff of AI for education, what are you most excited about in terms of like these upcoming kind of see them just over the hill technologies, and what does that do for students and teachers when we think about equity, when we think about adoption rate, when we think about getting beyond, what they're doing in North Carolina and putting out a really solid plan that it was, I think, Vera Cubero, she was talking about when you were talking to her. But then you were saying, look, but it comes into adoption, implementation, change management. What about those? So what technologies are you really excited about in 2024 do you feel like are going to get us there or closer?
Yeah, no, I think you can run Mistral right now, which is more of a small language model, right? Like open source on your phone locally, no bandwidth. And so it's weird and it's completely like open. But that's something that is pretty interesting. It definitely makes a huge difference in at school today, we didn't have enough bandwidth to use a ChatGPT with 150 people. So, for example, it takes a lot of compute. And so, if you think about that in terms of like global South and areas in which these technologies can be truly transformative in ways that we can't even conceptualize, I think it's where it gets really interesting. I think that we have some things to play out. I think there's a real question of who's going to win, defensibility. Like, is it going to be OpenAI eating everyone's lunch every time they release something, whether it's GPTs, when they release plugins, multimodality, like all these things that keep actually collapsing different bands of enterprise solutions. And so I think that that's a real question, especially with Sam Altman and Bill Gates talked recently about the fact that 5 or 4.5 is coming soon, and they'll have some pretty significant changes. And gosh, I hope if it comes out, 4 becomes free, because we really need to, 3.5, I hope is not what we do. I hope that there is a commitment to these technologies, that we keep having updated solutions, even if they aren't paid. I think that I am, a big thing that I think about a lot is like, how do you responsibly adopt tools that are not responsibly made? And so, when you think about schools, these schools are not fit for purpose for students. They're not fit for purpose really for like unsupervised use. And so I think that this is something that I'm really interested in seeing, like education specific large language models or small language models. I'm interested in seeing like classical AI, like deterministic AI plus generative AI, where instead of this hype cycle where everything is generative and comes with all the issues around hallucinations and bias, compute costs, et cetera, we instead have like really great deterministic AIs that can do, like help with, assessing student reading or math. And then generative AI is used to make it a better experience, to make it more personalized, differentiate it. But I think that this is where it's really, I think it's interesting is that we can kind of also get away from this hype cycle where there's really great solutions that already exist or have been worked on, that generative AI can be a wrapper to or an extension. But we don't have to just go into this wild, wild west where everything is like, it has to be an LLM or it has to be this piece.
Right.
Because these technologies, at least for schools, are really, really questionable in terms of can they be responsibly adopted without significant changes. So I think that this is where I think a lot. I think that we're going to see some really awesome tooling over the next year and a half. Everyone is always so surprised when I ask them, what is the most common use of ChatGPT? Like, what is the most common use case? And people say like emails, and they say resumes, and they say cheating on essays. But I always tell them, no. But it actually, it actually is coding, right? So I think the thing we don't recognize is that not only are we going to see this amazing continuant, like, U curve of generative AI and AI, implications and advancement, but all technology is able to be done faster with less resources.
Yeah.
And that's going to be where we're going to start to see some crazy, crazy things, especially when more and more software, engineers actually understand how this can benefit them. And I think we're going to see some really cool things coming from that as well.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it was well said. I think we're sort of at time, and I can already tell that we definitely need to have you back in a couple months and do
I don't wanna stop.
because
I'm a
we didn't even
talker,
get a chance
sorry.
to talk about like the impact on students and reteaching students and getting them ready for the future of AI and what does that look like. There's so many other questions that I have that I definitely would love to have you back for. So hopefully you're up for that. But to wrap this session up, because we do try to keep into that about 30-minute. The red carpet's yours. So what didn't we cover? What would you love people to know about what you're doing AI for education? How can they get involved? Because I know there's a lot of ways there. Or if you're listening to this and you're just a teacher and you're thinking, I don't know, I couldn't really do anything. I don't really have any pull or anything. That's not true, right? So like, what would you like to say about AI for education? While you do that, we're going to throw up 2 different banners here, your LinkedIn, and then we'll put up your email or your website as well, your email, your website
Awesome.
as well.
Well, I'm very on LinkedIn, y'all. I'm like, I definitely did not think I would be. Like, this is not my natural, social media is definitely not my natural state. I don't know if it's anybody's. But we post like a lot of resources. We're not traditional on LinkedIn. It's much more like resources, best practices, things you can share, some thought leadership pieces. So you can check us out there. And then, and I also really answer if you want to reach out. So always, like, I try to do at least a couple of calls a week when I have time with people that are reaching out. Today, I talked to an entrepreneur in a college in the UK that's building, something around learning and automation. And then our website is really the place we have like 90% of what we do is free. So our business model is like, it's quite funny. Start your own business and then give everything away for free. Not the most, amazing approach, but it's something that's working for us. And so we have our free prompt library that is 100 prompts. We have free resources around policy, around everything around adoption. We have student-facing materials as well, a curriculum that's free, a webinar series. We did 25 webinars between June and the last part of the year last year on all kinds of pieces. And we started our next webinars on the 24th. It's focused on building buy-in in diverse communities because there is that digital divide that's possible to be exacerbated. And then we work directly with schools, systems, and leadership associations. So if you want some extra support, I can come out, someone from my team. We can do everything from training on generative AI all the way through your strategy and adoption at the system level. So we do a lot with a very tiny team.
Well, it's super impressive. And like I said, Beth, myself, the team, we've been excited about talking to you for a while because, there's I used to be or still am, I guess, a LinkedIn strategist. And so I spend a lot of time there as well and obviously do more AI strategy now. But it's evident that you come from a place of help first and then the business will follow. And I'm a big fan of that type of business, that if you help people, there'll always be opportunities to make money off of that, whether it's on the last bit of it or 10% or otherwise. So want to say, just thank you for coming and hanging out with us for 35 minutes today. And yeah, we're definitely going to have you back. So just go ahead and say yes. We'll pencil it in for a month or two, and we'll talk all about all the other things. We'll just reference this one. We won't have to talk about the background. We're just going to talk about, what students can do, what teachers can do, because it's just so important. There's so much education to get out there. We want our show to be part of that, that movement. So thank you so much, Amanda. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, this was super awesome. I appreciate your time.
So many golden nuggets in this, right? Like, I mean, if you're listening to this, are you like me? Like, you want to go back, right? Like, okay, I just wanted to get the overview, and now I have to go back and like this and this and this.
And listen, I will say this. Obviously, go check out Amanda on LinkedIn because the content is very good. I don't care if you're in education or not. You should go to aiforeduction.io, correct? And go look at the prompt library. It's stellar. So I've always been super impressed with that. But if you're just playing with AI and you're like, I don't know how to start, or I don't know what to tell it or whatever, go look at the prompt library Amanda and her team have created, because it'll absolutely tell you how to get started. It solves the blank page problem, and it'll get you started, because you'll be immediately to take one of those prompts and go, oh, I don't do education, but this is how I would write it for my own use case. So it could be a huge resource for anybody. So highly recommend people going over there. Okay, I'll shut up about it. We think you're great, Amanda.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. All right, here comes the outro.
Thanks so much.